Welcome in to the Thursday edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell with me, Barry Allen with me. We will talk baseball and basketball on what promises to be an interesting weekend in the SEC. We've got baseball tonight, Vanderbilt and Missouri opening SEC play. Of course, we've got basketball coming up on Friday. Let's go to basketball first, Blake. Alabama and UCLA, you've said for a while you thought this was a matchup that was a favorable one for Alabama. Now that you've had some time to sleep on it, do you still think that?
Yeah, I think just the tempo to me is something where I think Alabama always has an advantage against teams like UCLA. And, we kind of compared it to Maryland, a team that if you just look at the numbers, those are two teams that if you rank them nationally, they're going to be towards, the bottom part when it comes to just, their average offensive possession length, just how they play defense, those kind of things. The games are just slower paced, and I think that is something where we saw what Maryland could not keep up with whenever Alabama got things going in that game against them. That's the same fear I would have for UCLA is if this game gets out and we're just having an up and down type of game. Now UCLA's got some good offensive players. That's for sure. That's their strength. They're a good offensive team, but some of their offensive numbers too can be a little bit misleading in terms of if you look at them. They're a top 30 3-point shooting team in the country, but they don't really necessarily have to make the three a whole lot. They get a lot. They get, the majority of their points come from the inside the arc. So I think it's 54.2% of their total points come from, 2-point range, that's top 75 in the country. So they're a team that will mainly focus on that. But as we know, and so many times we talked about, trading twos for threes, Alabama would be okay with because they are just going to be able to make, probably knock down some shots from outside. And when you look at it overall, I kind of mentioned the stat on UCLA not giving up a ton of three-pointers necessarily in a single game this year. They've only given up more than 10 once. But if you look at the opponents for UCLA have shot a pretty high percentage from three. And I think that puts them, again, I don't know the exact number, but I know that, the majority of their opponents have shot probably at least 35% or so from three. And they've had several that have shot, much higher than that. So I think that's something that I look at. It is going to be the same thing. It's the same thing we've talked about all year long with Alabama. If Alabama can play the type of game they want to play, make this a transition game, I think they win this game maybe by double digits. And if they're not hitting threes, that becomes certainly the theme too, where everybody says if Alabama can't win if they don't make threes. I don't think that's necessarily true in a game like this because defensively they'll be able to do some things, I think, to kind of cause some problems for UCLA. So I just, on paper, which is all we have to go by, I just really like the matchup for Alabama here. I think they're in a good spot, and it's just about pushing the tempo, which, as we've seen, they've been able to do that even against teams that want to try to slow them down. So
Ken Palm's only got this as a 4-point game, which, frankly, I'm surprised. I would have guessed if I'd not known that it would be 8 or 9 points. Is that surprising to you as well?
I thought so, but I was trying to think of what it was for the Maryland game. I want to say that one was that one surprised me a little bit too because I think he had that one pretty close, maybe 4 or 5 if I remember correctly. So those are kind of the ones that sometimes you look at and you just don't ever know because he is like, his system and all the data that he crunches and all that, like it's the best there is. But still, I think there are some certain aspects that, like I said, if you maybe think that in that projection, you feel like UCLA can kind of, do things more on their terms. Whereas we know if Alabama's kind of like, if they get rolling, it's just, I don't know how you can even account for that because they can just completely change the pace of a game. And I tell you, outside of Gonzaga this year, and I'm sure Baylor and some other teams have done it, but I just don't know there's another team in college basketball that can get points in a short amount of time. And just like Alabama, like you could look up in 30 seconds and they've added 9 points. Like it's just, they can completely swing the game, I think, so quickly. And that's one of their biggest strengths is that even if Alabama was down 15 with 5 minutes to go, I would think they'd still have a chance because we know how good they can shoot the ball and we know kind of how many possessions they can get out of a game. And that's the one thing too is if this is a low possession game, obviously that favors UCLA. If it's a high possession game, that will favor Alabama just because they have, I think, the better offensive weapons. Even if you look at some of the numbers and say, well, UCLA's numbers look pretty good offensively, and they do. But I still just think for Alabama, push the tempo, make sure Johnny Juzang doesn't get hot from three, and then I think they'll be fine.
I'm going to flip this to Barry for his thoughts in a minute, but I'm trying to think of where this could go wrong for Alabama. And the first thing that comes to mind is an element that we saw against Maryland, and we've seen at times. It's get Herb Jones in foul trouble. You mentioned
Yeah.
UCLA liking to shoot the two, but I look on paper, they're not a team that gets to the foul line inordinately. In terms of free throws to field goals, they're close to the national average. They're 160, according to Ken Palm. So nothing really jumping off the page here. Of course, games don't always play out like they're drawn up on Ken Palm. Some nights something jumps up and surprises you, but is there anything that, if you're Alabama, is a little bit of a caution flag heading into this one?
Well, I think that's it, and I think we kind of pointed that out with the Iona matchup and others like that. Like if I'm UCLA, I'm going right at Herbert Jones because that changes the whole dynamic of Alabama's defense. So that would be my game plan, is to try to, whoever he's guarding, I would have that guy, attacking the rim and trying to get him in foul trouble because it does. Like we talk about Alabama's defensive numbers, and they're one of the best defensive teams in the country. But I'd love to see kind of what the splits look like whenever he's not on the floor and when he is on the floor in terms of their efficiency on defense. Which I would, without even looking at it, I just know that they are a probably worse defensive team when he's not on the floor than when he is on the floor. So I think that's for me. If I'm UCLA, I'm just trying to attack him and really get him in foul trouble early because that will kind of change how Alabama plays defensively. So there's no doubt. I mean, that's one of the things you got to do, I think, if you're UCLA, to have a chance to win here. And yeah, I mean, if this game turns into a 3-point shootout, again, UCLA's percentages suggest that they'll be able to make enough shots to have a chance, but I just don't think that that's the kind of game they want to play because when you look at it overall, they're not a 3-point shooting team. Like they're a team that, I guess if you look up and down the line, I want to say they've only hit, double-digit threes 4 times this year. They've had some 8, 9 type performances, and they've been pretty efficient. That's the thing, is they've done well efficiently, shooting the three on their side, but they've not done a good job on the other side in terms of allowing opponents to shoot a high percentage. And again, low possession games for UCLA, we're used to that. So that's it. You got to make it a low possession game. You got to try to get Herbert Jones in foul trouble. I think that's the dynamic for UCLA winning this game.
Well, and as a footnote to that, when Herb Jones got in foul trouble, Alex Reese comes in, who's a senior and is a capable player, was a very nice recruit for Alabama back when it got Alex Reese. And he's a kid who scores 13 points in 19 minutes against Maryland. So like, even if the nightmare scenario happens for Alabama, relatively speaking, that Jones gets in foul trouble, I do think they have a backup there who's been around the league and college basketball and is, relatively pretty well prepared to step in and fill in competently. Now, he's not going to fill in at a Herb Jones level, but even there, it's the thing that we've said all year. Alabama just seems to have an answer for everything that could go wrong. And I think with Alex Reese, that's a nice luxury to have as a backup if you're Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, the depth is one of the biggest strengths of this team. There's no doubt. There's a reason why they're, again, we can talk about some of the stats and everything, but I think it's just they have so much depth, and they've had guys who have really acclimated to their role overall, and I think that's something, that's certainly just so important in terms of what they're able to do and that kind of stuff. But, that's something, I guess, when you look at overall as well, for UCLA, I mean, they've got a pretty balanced attack where you've got, what is it? I think you got 5 guys who average double figures. And, beyond that, you've got some guys that play good minutes. But, that's kind of the flip side, too, for Alabama, is if you get some of their guys in foul trouble, that completely changes the game, too, because, they do have guys that play double-digit minutes, but in terms of production, like, you kind of know what you're getting from this UCLA team. And they are, that's one thing I think UCLA in their favor is, they are a very guard-oriented type team. Like, they're going to have a lot of things they can do from the guard position to make things difficult. And so I think that's something that can play to UCLA's favor in this game because it is going to feel like, a guard type of game just based on how both teams play. But I don't know. I just don't know that UCLA can pack the punch offensively that Alabama can. And that's where I think if you're Alabama, you've got to just guard Johnny Juzang. And, will that be a Herbert Jones thing? I'm not sure. But I would have to believe that that's probably the likely matchup you're going to get there in terms of what you want to try to do. But if they can limit Johnny Chusang, making shots from outside, I think Alabama's in a very sweet spot. So,
Barry, what's the thinking down in Tuscaloosa heading into this one?
Well, I think the majority of folks feel like Alabama's in pretty good shape Sunday against UCLA. I mean, it played extremely well. What was it, Monday night against Maryland? They were a little down on them from Saturday's game with Iona, but sometimes that happens. Playing a team that you're supposed to beat, and then playing a little bit better team, Maryland, and now UCLA. Which not so much recently, but in the history of the game, the real blue blood of college basketball. With all the national championships that they won. So it's a good opportunity for Alabama. Might be the best football school out there taking on the team that's won the most basketball national championships in a Sweet 16 game. But I feel like Alabama's got the depth, to get through this and play. I think they have more player. They play more players, somewhat than UCLA does. But UCLA has 6 players that average 20 minutes a game, and 6 players that average double figures. So it doesn't seem like after the 6th guy they get a ton. They have Jalen Hill, who averages 18 minutes, and David Singleton averages 17 minutes, but they only score 10 points a game combined. It seems like the depth is going to be what helps Alabama in this game, and as y'all said, keep Herb Jones. Keep Herb Jones out of foul trouble, make shots, and don't get anybody else hurt. And because they've really battled, that's one thing that Alabama's had issues with as well. In addition to keeping Herb Jones on the floor out of foul trouble, is they've also just had a terrible run of injuries, and they got to keep everybody healthy and try to get through the next 2 weeks.
Blake, let's talk Arkansas and Oral Roberts. I think we'd both be surprised if Arkansas were not to win and move on, but break this one down for us.
No, I mean it's all about Oral Roberts' defense for me. I think if Oral Roberts doesn't play well defensively, I think Arkansas, could win this game by double digits just based on knowing what they can do. They're not the same as Alabama, but we've seen it with Arkansas too. When they get rolling, they are hard to stop. And I'm also intrigued to see kind of Oral Roberts' mindset here, because you get out of that first weekend, you make history of sorts here as only the second 15 seed to do this, and then what's your mindset coming out? I think it probably helps you a little bit, certainly to have that break and then to kind of get ready for the next one. But also, it does take some of that momentum away a little bit because you are, almost or whatever, a week removed from that last game. So I'm curious to see how that goes for them. And then, on the other side of it, I just look at Arkansas and feel like they are going to be able to, do some things. And, Oral Roberts is a team that doesn't really turn the ball over. We talked about it. I love that trifecta of a team that doesn't turn the ball over. They can make threes, and they're the best free throw shooting team in the field. That's a pretty good combination. But I do feel like Arkansas may be able to turn them over a bit, just, with the guard play and the length that Arkansas has on the perimeter. So that's something that I would look at here. But really, it's going to come down to how well does Oral Roberts play defense, and can Oral Roberts make shots from the perimeter? If they struggle with both of those, Arkansas probably wins this game by 15 plus. But if they come out early, if they're making shots, this should be interesting. And I think, too, what you have to remember, a team like Oral Roberts, because they were up 10 or 12 or whatever it was the first time these two teams played, they're sort of similar to Alabama in that if Oral Roberts is down, 15 with 5 minutes to go, they still shoot it well enough to where they can make it interesting. So I think Arkansas, it's all about guarding, the three with them. You know what you're getting from those two guys, on Oral Roberts, and I just think it's all about defense to me in this one for both sides, really.
Oral Roberts, since the start of the NCAA tournament, has jumped up almost 50 spots in KenPom. Since the start of the Summit tournament. So this is the team that really playing its best basketball in tournament play, which, we knew that going in, but it's hard to believe this team was 13-10 heading into the Summit League tournament.
Well, and I think that's where the defense comes in, because they're so inconsistent defensively that even if they're making shots, they can still lose games. And, it's just kind of fascinating to think about, just in terms of, some of the games that they've won and some of the games that they've lost. If you look up and down their numbers, they've lost some games where they've made 16 threes. But it's just because they haven't defended well enough to do that, and they've won some games where they've only made, 5 threes or something. So it's an interesting dynamic when you have a team like that, which, if you're going to be a team that's not great defensively, you need to be a great shooting team, which is, kind of the dynamic that they have working for them there. So honestly, I can't say I'd be shocked if Oral Roberts won this game, just because they do shoot it well enough. And again, in a game that is close, they're going to make their free throws. So if this game gets down to the wire, and this is sort of the same thing I said with Arkansas and Colgate, which, that ended up flipped towards Arkansas's favor after a bad start. But, Oral Roberts at this point, they've got nothing to lose. And so I think if you're Arkansas, you don't want to give them, that confidence, that momentum back that they had 5-6 days ago, whatever. That's something I think that, you don't want to let a team like this hang around. And guess what? Florida can tell you that more than anyone, because Florida let this team hang around way too long, and they just could not put them away. And that's where I think for Arkansas, I think Arkansas has a next gear offensively maybe than Florida had. But either way, I don't think this is going to be easy. I still feel like, though, that if Arkansas comes out, defends the perimeter, they're going to be able to find a way to score some points, just because I don't think Oral Roberts, defensively, is at that same level.
Let's flip to baseball. Barry, we've got 2 series starting tonight, or hopefully starting tonight. Vanderbilt goes to Missouri. I don't know what the weather's like in Columbia at the moment, but down in Alabama, it's maybe going to be a little dicey today. Maybe putting the doubt of some doubt in the start of Ole Miss and Alabama. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would be shocked if Ole Miss and Alabama play tonight. We're under what they call a first alert weather day. I've learned a lot of acronyms in weather over the years. It's another PDS, a particularly dangerous situation. Weather-wise, storms have already started popping up across the state. It's very dark and very windy here in Tuscaloosa right now. So I would think that Mother Nature is going to throw a double no-hitter tonight at Sewell Thomas Stadium. And I'd be very surprised if that game is played tonight, particularly the way the day is setting up in our weather pattern.
How about further out for the weekend? Is this a chance that you think they can get all the games in? I mean, because you'll obviously have a doubleheader one day, but what are your thoughts on maybe just the league being able to play all the games throughout the weekend?
Yeah, I think tomorrow, pretty much league-wide is okay. It's supposed to be sunny and 80 here tomorrow. They always say if you don't like the weather in Alabama, wait 3 minutes and it'll change. There is a chance for some showers and thunderstorms Saturday, and there is a chance for a lot of rain Sunday. Maybe a little bit concerned about Arkansas and Mississippi State on Sunday. They might have to squeeze in a doubleheader on Saturday. The league rules say if Alabama and Ole Miss do not play tonight, they'll have to play a doubleheader tomorrow, 2 9-inning games. Those, I think, are pretty safe. They may have to battle some raindrops on Saturday. Might be a long day trying to get 9 innings in on Saturday, but I think they can. Sunday looks a little bit worse than Saturday does as far as storms and things, but I don't think the last 2 days of the weekend are going to be total washouts. Maybe Auburn might have some issues, Saturday and Sunday as well, playing Kentucky at home, but tomorrow should be pretty good should be pretty good for everybody.
Well, one of the cool things about the SEC this year is I just don't see many uninteresting series this year. I think the one that I would circle is Missouri and Vandy. That's in Columbia. I don't see that being much of a series there. So I think we focus on the others. And again, I can tell you reasons to be intrigued by any of the other series, but to me, the headliner, no doubt, has got to be Arkansas and Mississippi State.
Yeah, no question. And recently it's been root for the home team in that series. 4 consecutive sweeps by the home team in the Arkansas-Mississippi State series. So I guess you'd have to say advantage Mississippi State, in that. The way these 2 teams have played, here recently. And since Arkansas joined the league in 1992, I thought this was kind of interesting. they've played 82 games and both teams have won 41. So it's a dead split. But be interesting to see Arkansas go on the road in the SEC, be their second road trip, or actually their third. They played a tournament in Arlington. They went to Louisiana Tech, and now they'll go to Starkville. So they are a tested team on the road. They're 5-1 away from bomb this year and going to Mississippi State. Arkansas's played better of late. They won 4 straight after losing, that horrific game to Alabama last Friday night, 16-1. They bounced back, won 4 straight. They pitched well in the Alabama series. They hit, 5 home runs in 2 games against Memphis in the midweek, but playing better going into the Mississippi State series than they were going into the Alabama series. But, what does that do for you when you're going in and face one of the top pitching staffs in the league? And that'll be a key. Can Arkansas generate offense? Like we said last week, can LSU generate enough offense? And for 2 days, they got 1 run. Can Arkansas generate enough offense against this really good pitching staff that Mississippi State has?
Probably number 2 on the list to me would be LSU going to Tennessee. We've talked about LSU's bullpen troubles. We thought that LSU had the potential to break in that 5 elite category. I mean, starting the year, you had the 5 teams that are ranked 1 through 5 in the polls now, and then LSU is maybe just a hair behind that. I guess you could say the same for Arkansas, but LSU's bullpen has cast a lot of doubt on its ability to belong in that top group. On the other hand, you've had Landon Marceau, who's just been unbelievable. He's kind of gone in the shadow of some other SEC pitchers, namely Rocker and Leiter. But in terms of ERA, he's been just as good, if not better, than those guys. Tennessee, a team that was kind of in that third pack of teams coming into the season, where they lost some hitters, and we weren't as sure that they had the elite pitching, but the Vols have been rock solid so far. I think, to me, LSU and Tennessee and Knoxville, I'm hoping will tell us a little bit more about both those teams, because frankly, I'm not exactly sure where to put the anchor on either of them. I think Tennessee is a really good team. I don't know if it can be a great team, but I feel more confident in Tennessee's ability to be a really good team than I do LSU. And I think LSU's got more upside, and a lot of that's because of Jaden Hill, but Hill's been kind of off and on so far. I'm really interested to see how the series in Knoxville plays out, because maybe it'll tell us a little bit more about how good each of those teams is.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting, series for these 2 teams. And, can Tennessee, they won at Georgia last week, but can they beat and compete with one of the real blue bloods, in the SEC? In LSU this weekend. I mean, Tennessee did something last weekend they hadn't done in 7 years. They won their first SEC series of the season. They had not done that since 2014, and they've not won their first 2 SEC series in 20 years. It's go back all the way to 2001 when they started 5-1. So Tennessee is, doesn't have the history on their side, that LSU does, even though Tennessee's had some good teams and they've played in Omaha, but, certainly nothing like LSU. I don't know that I would say that the winner of this series would, maybe be the 6th best team in the league. I don't know if I'm ready to say that quite yet, but I think LSU, I think they hit well. Marceau and Labus have pitched really well. Hill has had some struggles, although he pitched well last week. I mean, the first 2 games against Mississippi State that LSU lost, both games are scoreless in the 5th inning. And I don't think LSU's bullpen last weekend was ineffective at all. I think they pitched about as well as they could. Mississippi State, I think, got a little firepower on offense and can score some runs. And then, LSU found a way to scratch out a win on Sunday, 8-3. They scored more runs on Sunday against Mississippi State than the Bulldog pitchers had allowed in their previous 9 games, which was only 5 runs. So they can score, and I'm interested to see, Tennessee's starting pitching, how that will hold up. Tidwell and Dallas and Will Heflin, can they hold up against, Hill, Marceau, and Labus and get into that LSU bullpen? Because Tennessee's got some offensive firepower. I mean, Liam Spence is a really good leadoff hitter. Jake Rucker's really good. Drew Gilbert's been a really good hitter for them this year. Luke Lipsius has had some really good games for them. So Tennessee can hit, and they can generate some offense. But how will their starting pitching match up against LSU's, and can they get into that LSU bullpen? And will that be success enough for them at home?
Yeah, LSU also has not played outside the state of Louisiana. It's had a couple of road games in the state, but not been outside the state. So that'll be interesting too.
Yeah, we saw that last week with A&M. You know, they had not played a game out of Texas, and they go to Florida, and they get bounced 3 times by the Gators. So that's a good point there that, you know, LSU playing their first game outside of the boot, as they call it, in LSU in Louisiana, that is, going up to Knoxville this weekend. Will they have the same results that A&M had at Florida last week?
Speaking of Florida, I think the Florida-South Carolina series pretty interesting too. The Gamecocks, I got to see here 3 games last weekend. I still think that's a pretty good hitting team. They just ran into the wrong pitching staff on the wrong weekend. Florida seems to be getting its act together a little bit as we get into conference play. Of course, it got a sweep of A&M, a very impressive sweep of A&M at that, to start conference play. What's your take on these two this weekend?
I think it's an interesting series. You know, in the East, you know, 2 teams that have played, you know, for SEC Eastern Division championships. You know, South Carolina doesn't really need to afford to start, you know, with 2 straight losses. And, you know, what a daunting task, you know, to get your SEC schedule. You're Mark Kingston, and you get to your SEC schedule and you go, hey, at Vanderbilt, Florida at home. Yeah, we can handle that. I mean, you get Rocker, you score 2 runs on him, you lose 3-2, and you're feeling pretty good. And then the next 37 hitters you send to the plate, you get a walk and 36 consecutive outs before you manage some offense on Sunday against that pitching staff. And they're not going to, I mean, Florida's pitching staff is not like that, but Florida's pitching staff is really good. And their freshmen have really carried them this year. You know, Halter and Hickey and Gachette, the catcher that we talked about Tuesday, they moved him into the catcher spot and moved Hickey out of the catcher spot into the DH to get some more, you know, offense in the lineup. And those 3 guys carried them last week, and they went 17 for 34 against A&M, and these are freshmen. But South Carolina, I think, has got some offensive firepower. I think they can hit. Obviously with, you know, Wes Clark, the leading home run hitter, but, you know, Allen and Wimmer, you know, did really well, you know, Sunday for South Carolina, jump-started their offense with back-to-back homers off Schultz, you know, in the 4th inning, and got things rolling for them. But Florida's dominated this series of late. They've won 3 in a row and 7 out of the last 8 with South Carolina, and it's been a kind of a domination for the Gators, and they'll see if they can continue that this weekend in Columbia. And South Carolina's hoping they can, you know, reverse the fortunes a little bit.
Georgia and A&M, I think one that interests me too, and I believe that one's in Athens. No, I'm sorry, that's in College Station. Excuse me. 2 of the league's probably more underrated pitching staffs, I guess, is a good way to put it. They're both in the top half of in ERA. Georgia 282, that sits 4th in the league. A&M sits 6th at 310. Aggies lead the league. Or excuse me, 2nd now in strikeouts. Mississippi State has got 1 more than do the Aggies now. State's also played fewer games. But in any case, I think that's one where runs are going to be at premium, and I have a hard time knowing who's got an advantage here. I tend to think it's A&M, given that's at home, but I think that'll be one of these series where we may look back and all the games are 3-2 one way or the other at the end of the weekend.
Yeah, I would expect some close games in College Station this weekend. You just look at the, you know, statistics. Georgia is better statistically in hitting, ERA, and fielding than A&M, and, you know, in all 3 categories. Georgia's had the knack for the close games. I mean, they obviously won't have any walk-offs this weekend, but they lead the SEC with 6 walk-off wins this season, including Tuesday night against Kennesaw State. But they have found ways to win games. You know, A&M was playing really well prior to last weekend going to Gainesville. Now they've lost 4 in a row, swept at Florida, and then lost a 2-1 midweek game at home to Rice. So Georgia losing the series last weekend to Tennessee, I think, at home. I think this is a crucial early season SEC series for both teams. And because it's in College Station, I think it's more of a must-win for Texas A&M than it is for Georgia at this point, because Georgia, you know, still has 4 home series remaining to get right after that Tennessee loss. I don't think A&M could stand to be 1-5 after the first 2 weekends and losing a home series to Georgia. So I think it's a critical series for the Aggies this weekend.
Another question is who's going to be calling the shots from the Georgia dugout?
Yes, Scott Daly has been the acting head coach for Georgia. Scott Strickland has missed the last 4 games with COVID. Did not coach in the Tennessee series, was not in the dugout, not on the bench, and Tuesday night against Kennesaw State. So we'll be anxious to see if Scott returns this weekend to the dugout and see if he's there. If not, it'll be Scott Daly again, their associate head coach, running the things for them. It was interesting. Scott was sidelined one day after the Georgia gymnastics team had to withdraw from the SEC Gymnastics Championship last week because of COVID through their program. So they didn't get to compete for the SEC Gymnastics Championship. And then Scott Strickland is sidelined. And of course, with NCAA and SEC rules, up to an hour before the game, after an hour before the game, he cannot have any communication with the team or the staff or anyone. And they just have to play without him. But Scott Daly's been running the show the last week for Georgia.
Alabama and Ole Miss, we touched on that earlier, that there may be some weather issues with that. I'm really interested to see how both teams respond this weekend. What are you expecting when those two teams lock horns this weekend?
Well, I do know that Ole Miss is getting Doug Nikhazy back. He's going to pitch game 2 for them. Would be Friday, but the way it looks like it's going to be Friday anyway. Game 2 may start him in game 1 if they don't play tonight. It's going to be Hogland and Nikhazy and Diamond. Ole Miss is kind of hard to read to me a little bit. Nikhazy being out, Hogland's moved into that number 1 role. He's pitched pretty well. Derek Diamond has struggled in the number 3 spot till last week. Then he goes out against Auburn and throws 6 shutout innings, turns a 14-0 lead over the bullpen, and they have to hang on for a 19-11 win. Ole Miss can score runs in bunches. They can have games where they can't score and have to scratch out wins. And they have games that you just kind of scratch your head. They go, well, how did they lose 2 out of 3 to UCF, who's now 9-12, who lost a really bizarre game to Florida State last night in the ACC? How do they lose to ULM and struggle with Belmont and then go out and, play really well last weekend against Auburn? And so I'm interested to see how they respond when they come on the road to Tuscaloosa this weekend. They're 3-0 in the league for the first time since 2004. And then you got Alabama, who opens up last Friday night at Arkansas with a 16-1 win. And I think we've all thought, at Alabama at 30-4 the last 2 years, well, maybe they've turned things around. And I think we were all kind of sitting there going, well, we need to see them play in an SEC series. And they go out Friday night and score 16 runs, and you go, wow, they've really turned it around. And then they come back Saturday and Sunday and they score 2 runs and get 5 hits in 2 games. And then they get 4 runs and 7 hits Tuesday night and a home loss to Southern Miss. So now they're bringing a 3-game losing streak and, 6 runs and 12 hits into the series with Ole Miss. Not exactly how you want your offense going against the Ole Miss team who, coming into the season, had a pretty good pitching staff and still might do that. Just haven't figured it all out on the mound yet. But getting Nikhazy back for Ole Miss this weekend, I think, will be a key piece to their puzzle.
The other one, and I feel like I keep saying this, it's just hard to get a read on where this was going. Kentucky and Auburn, very interesting to me because Auburn was supposed to be better than the two teams preseason. We've talked a lot about Auburn's pitching troubles. We've talked about Kentucky being a little bit of a mystery team, but liking what we've seen so far, but also not having played much of a schedule. I think Auburn and Kentucky is another one I'm interested to see because I want to see in particular how Kentucky handles Auburn's bats and if Auburn can get outs, and especially from the bullpen or frankly anywhere. So I think this is another one that for its own reasons is worth watching.
Yeah, and I think it's a must-win for Auburn. 0-3. I don't think they can afford to start 1-5 and climb that mountain, in the SEC West because they're going to be, they've already they will have played Ole Miss and Kentucky, and they still have Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi State, and LSU and A&M still left out of the West. I think it's a must-win series for them. And the way they pitch, I don't know. I don't know if they can win a home series with Kentucky or not. I don't think Kentucky's been on the road yet. They were supposed to go to North Carolina to open the season, but that series was canceled because of COVID. I think everything else has been, in the friendly confines of Kentucky Proud Park, and they've become very comfortable there. Benefited, by opening last weekend with Missouri, winning the first two games, and losing the game on Sunday on a pinch hit 3-run homer in the 8th inning. Kentucky's pitched pretty well this year. Auburn has not, and I mean that's just the bottom line for Auburn is they have just struggled on the mound. They're second worst ERA in the league at 4.48. They've given up 94 runs this whole season, 19 games, 94 runs. 41 of those 91 runs have come in the last 3 Sundays. So that's 46% of their runs allowed have come in 3 games, which are the last 3 Sundays against Boston College, Little Rock, and Ole Miss. And Boston College came back from a 9-1 deficit to win 11-9, and Ole Miss had a 14-0 lead, and Auburn got back in the game, and they went back out in the bottom of the 8th and promptly gave up 5, and they're back down 19-9 again. They gave up 19 runs in the series finale against Ole Miss. Now, they pitched well Friday night. Greenhill and Hoagland, had double shutouts going into the 8th inning before a pinch hit home run for Ole Miss. But Auburn's got to get better on the mound, and I don't think that's a huge revelation. I think if you talk to Auburn, that's what they tell you. They've just got to get better on the mound, and they've not been consistent. They've tweaked their starting rotation each of the first 5 weekends. I haven't seen what they're going to do yet this weekend. I'd be shocked if they're not a 6th different rotation. The Bright kid on Sunday, who's a freshman, had pitched well the last 2 Sundays. He has not. And so what will they do with him? Jack Owen has pitched in relief last week for the first time this year. Richard Fitz threw a midweek game last week. That's 2 key pieces to their puzzle that are veteran SEC starters that haven't pitched a whole lot in the last couple of weeks. Fitz gave up 5 home runs in back-to-back starts to Baylor and Boston College and has thrown like 2 innings since then. So they've got to get it figured out on the mound, and it's got to come pretty quick.
Well, Missouri hosts Vandy this weekend. I guess if you want to take an optimistic take on the Tigers, it's this, okay? Missouri got off to a horrible start in its season. It did take 3 or 4 from Illinois State on the road 2 weekends ago. It goes to Kentucky, loses 2 or 3, wins the finale, loses game 2 by a 5-4 score. So I think Missouri has been more competitive lately. But, boy, I think it's going to be a struggle for the Tigers even to take one against Vanderbilt. Now, again, it's in Columbia, and so you never know. But I just see this as probably the least interesting of the series we will be watching this weekend.
Yeah, Vanderbilt's won 6 of the 7 series since Missouri came aboard in 2013. Missouri's only series win was at home in Columbia in 2018. I don't see that. I really don't see that changing any this weekend. I see Vanderbilt's just way better than them. I can't see Missouri generating a whole lot of offense, against that pitching staff. And I don't expect Jack Leiter to throw another no-hitter, and I don't expect Schultz or Rocker to do that every week either. But I can't see Vanderbilt pitching staff being challenged much by the Missouri offense this weekend. And I think one thing for Vanderbilt with the dominating pitching staff that they have, and you've seen them more than either of us, and probably more than any of the other teams we've all seen combined. But their offense has gotten better, and I think they get Keegan back. He came back last weekend. I think he'll be back, but they lost Tate Colwick the other night. I believe I saw he was injured in the game Tuesday night. Hit 2 home runs last weekend, but with that pitching staff, any kind of offense they get is really good for them. And I think they've had some really good offensive weekends of late.
Yeah, they did get Keegan back, who was, I guess, the leading hitter in the league before he got hurt. His timing is clearly not back when I watch him. Colwick, they got him hurt. He's going to be out probably 3 to 6 weeks with a hamate injury. So they're moving Parker Nolan to second. Jason Gonzalez goes back to third. I think that fortunately for Vanderbilt, they've got a lot of good depth there, but I think losing Tate Colwick, boy, he was really starting to come on, and I think that's a little bit of a blow for them. But again, if there's a team that I think that's got the depth that's equipped to handle it, Vanderbilt's certainly top of the list of the clubs that I think you can say that about. Barry, any final thoughts on SEC baseball going into the weekend before we wrap up the show today?
Well, I just got a text from a friend from Alabama who works the games, and it just texted me and told me that they would be playing a doubleheader with Ole Miss tomorrow at 2 and 6. So the game tonight in Tuscaloosa has been postponed, because of the weather. So a doubleheader tomorrow. But like you said at the start, I don't think there's a whole lot of series all year long that you're going to yawn when you go, oh, that's an awful series. I think there's a lot of excitement. The Arkansas Mississippi State, I think, is a key early season series. May determine, the West champion, may determine, who's the top seed in the tournament, may determine one of the overall top seeds nationally, in terms of, super regionals and positioning to go to Omaha. So I think that's one of the key series that everybody's excited to see, and how will Arkansas handle Mississippi State's pitching staff. And then the other thing we talked about, I think A&M, I think they have to win this weekend. They don't want to start 1-5, against the East. And we'll be talking about they're the only team that hasn't played a series within their own division. Their first 2 weekends are both Eastern Division teams, and they don't need to be 1-5 and still have 6 Western Division series out there in the last 8 weeks. So I think it's a big weekend for the Aggies.
Well, and as you've gotten your text, I've gotten one on my end. School is going to be out here early in the Nashville area because of possibility of high winds and those sorts of things. So let's hope this doesn't become a theme in the Southeast this weekend.
Yeah, the weather's an issue. I hope everybody's safe today. We're a magnet for it. We live in South Tuscaloosa, and last Wednesday, we're, I would say, less than a mile from Shelton State Community College, and it came over the top of the college and thankfully turned and went across, thankfully for us, sad for the people that were affected by it. But we did have one tornado on the ground last week, and it turned and missed our area and our neighborhood. But, we're kind of like a magnet here for attracting tornadoes. They somehow like Tuscaloosa for some reason. I like Tuscaloosa. I like living here. I wish they didn't care for us so much. And, I don't want anybody to be injured or have any harm or danger or deaths or any kind of destruction. But, you got to keep your eye on the weather and be safe. And, the weather people aren't out there trying to scare you, and they're not out there trying to drive up their ratings. This stuff is serious, and you just got to be careful. And hopefully everybody will be safe in the Southeast and the Southwest and the United States, and hopefully all of our teams will be safe as well, and we can get as many games in as we possibly can, because it's a good league and it's a lot of good teams, and it'll be a good race.
I'm into that. Okay, I'm going to throw it to Blake to close us out here. Blake, I know you're keeping your eye on the transfer portal, the college basketball rumor mill, and stuff pops up every minute. So I'm going to give it to you to close with anything interesting that you picked up on since we started the show.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we talked about with transfers, I will say, I guess the only way to say it is just kind of say that I wouldn't be surprised if, a guy like Xavier Pinson, has some other opportunities maybe to go somewhere else in the SEC. We know he transferred from Missouri. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think you'll have some SEC teams interested in him. And then, elsewhere, I think let's just say there have also been some rumors on the national college basketball coaching front that we could see play out here over the next day or so as well. So lots of stuff happening this time of year, not just with the NCAA tournament, but as we know, transfers, coaching carousel, lots of stuff going on. So those are some to keep an eye on. But for everything else, you can follow all our stuff, southeastern14.com, all our basketball, baseball, we'll have football stuff coming, all that. So check that out over there.
Yeah, lots of moving parts here at the 14. We're trying to keep track of it all as best we can. Like Blake said, we will probably hit some football spring practice next week. Should have a special guest coming up Friday. I won't tell you who yet, but we're excited about that. We'll have you covered with baseball, basketball, and football here at the 14. Be sure and rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. You can get that on Apple Podcasts or a lot of the other destinations where you would find podcasts. Check out our work at southeastern14.com. Follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern. Anyway, thank you for listening to the Thursday episode of the 14. We'll be back with another one on Friday afternoon.